Have you ever been labeled as left-wing or conversely right-wing due to your stance on a particular issue, like migration, minority rights, or support for Ukraine's defense? But why does the definition change seemingly at random depending on the topic? In extreme cases, it seems straightforward. Stalin was leftist, Hitler was rightist. Democrats are left and Republicans are right. But where then do UK's Liberal Democrats fit? Perhaps centrist? And what about so-called resurgence of the far right in Europe? Should we be worried, or it's all just media hype? Unfortunately, it's all too easy to slap labels on things we don't like without really understanding what they mean. So let's get to the bottom of this. In this video, we're going to explore the main ways of understanding the difference between left and right, along with discussing absurd and often unhelpful lines of division. Let's figure things out together, with no extremes. You might have heard this story before, so I'll be quick. It's all kicked off during the French Revolution at the end of 18th century. Imagine this. Representatives from all walks of life gathered in the National Constituent Assembly. The folks who wanted to keep the monarchy and protect the aristocracy sat on the president's right. Those who wanted radical change, universal suffrage, and equality sat on the left. Basically, the right wanted to keep things as they were, while the left wanted to shake things up. They were inspired by ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity. Though, to be fair, they weren't quite thinking about equality for women just yet. But this division was not absolute. It never is. For example, within the left-wing Jacobin club, there was its own right wing, which advocated the preservation of royal power, but with restriction as in neighboring England. The revolution swung back and forth, but ultimately after Napoleon's defeat, the monarchy returned to France for a while. But that initial division into left and right stuck, and we're still using it today. One way to understand the difference between left and right is to think about their attitudes towards changes in society. For the right, tradition holds value, preserving established norms and time-tested practices. Instead, for the left, the value is progress, purposeful changes in society that should change it for the better. It is the difference between the party of order and the party of movement, as the French political scientist François Gauguel called them. This approach worked best in 19th century Europe, when old and new elites were fighting each other. On the right side, landowners, churchmen, and officers. On the left, liberal social groups dissatisfied with status inequality, particularly so-called bourgeoisie. Later, labor movements were also classified as leftist, because they sought to change the existing status quo. Instead, a part of liberals, on the contrary, moved to the right, because they had a negative attitude towards the new socialist movements. The disadvantage of this approach is that it depends on the context, because as soon as we leave 19th century, complete chaos emerges. A clear example is the last years of the existence of the Soviet Empire, when supporters of the old Bolshevik regime, such as State Committee of the State of Emergency or GKChP, were considered right-wing. And everyone who was in favor of reforming or destroying the Soviet system were called leftists. It sounds absurd. How can supporters of the USSR be right? But under the tradition versus progress lens, it held up. So it turns out that the difference between the right and the left is not only that the former are conservatives and the latter seek change, although this is often right. For example, modern far-right movements position themselves as supporters of tradition, while the far left consider themselves supporters of progress. However, since there are so many contradictions with this approach, there is another way of distinguishing between the right and the left. Let's talk economy. In short, left-wing economic policy supports government intervention, while the right wing is skeptical and negative about it. Think of those political compass quizzes. Left-wing economic policies are all about social equality, free healthcare, and education. The further left you go, the more the government regulates markets and taxes. In addition, the left economic policy assumes a larger number of state-owned companies, so a significant part of the country's GDP belongs to the public sector. The right, on the other hand, is all about free enterprise and low taxes. They believe the invisible hand of the market should guide the economy. So medicine, education, and other social services must reside in the private sector. At the extremes, you have planned economy for the far left, where the government controls everything, and a completely free market on the far right, where the functions of a state are reduced to a minimum, the night watchman. According to this approach, the social democratic parties in Europe and the Democratic Party in the United States are indeed left, because they favor increased social programs that entail higher taxes and larger government. Instead, the Conservative Party of Britain or the Republican Party in the US are right-wing, because they seek to reduce the role of the state in economic redistribution. American Republican activist Grover Norquist said, "I'm not in favor of abolishing the government. I just want to shrink it down to the size where we can drown it in the bathtub." This right-left spectrum works well when we're discussing the economy, but it doesn't explain the difference in cultural politics and the level of state control over private life. To address this, back in 1956, Heinz Eysenck proposed to add vertical axis, which in modern political coordinates reflects governmental control over personal and political life. The opposite extremes on this axis are totalitarianism and anarchy. This gives us 4 boxes: authoritarian left, authoritarian right, libertarian left, and libertarian right. It's a bit like the Hogwarts houses for politics. But like in any system, it has its flaws. For example, both fascism and Bolshevism end up in the same box, authoritarian left. This is because they both created strong controlling states with left-leaning economic policies. In the USSR, a planned economy. In fascism, a government merger with corporations. Now we often compare Nazism, a type of fascism, and Soviet communism. However, it is worth remembering that these are still different types of evil. And this system still doesn't quite capture the difference in their attitudes towards change. Both fascism and Bolshevism were revolutionary, just in different ways. For some, the revolution was conservative, and for others, proletarian. That is why there is a third way of dividing into right and left, not based on different views on the economy or social changes, but based on different attitudes to the idea of equality. This brings us to a third way of looking at left and right, and it's all about equality. This criterion was proposed by Norberto Bobbio in his work Destra e Sinistra, Left and Right. In his opinion, the left seeks to achieve equality, while the right considers such plan utopian and even harmful. As 2 canonical examples, Bobbio cites 2 famous philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Friedrich Nietzsche. Rousseau believes that all evil in the world comes from the fact that people are born equal, but society yokes them to the shackles of inequality. Nietzsche is the complete opposite, because he believes that people are on the contrary unequal by nature, and society tries to make us equal. That is where all the troubles come from. Therefore, Rousseau is leftist and Nietzsche is rightist. According to this logic, government intervention in the economy can be left-wing, that is aimed at equalizing the benefits, or right-wing, which focuses on helping macroeconomic indicators and businesses when the market does not regulate itself. What about the difference between Bolsheviks and fascists? By this criterion, Bolshevism is, of course, a left-wing ideology, which is all about making everyone equal, although in practice it turned out into gulag and genocide. After all, it ended up like Orwell's Animal Farm. all animals are equal, but some are more equal. Instead, fascism positively perceives inequality, which is clearly a sign of righteousness. In the doctrine of fascism, Mussolini writes, he asserts that inequality is inevitable, salutary and beneficent to men, which cannot be equalized by mechanical or external fact like universal suffrage. In the same way, the Nazis, although the name contains the word socialist, according to this criterion is a right-wing ideology, because they openly proclaim the inequality of different people and races, while the Soviets are, on official level, spoke of international brotherhood. Of course, this way of dividing the right and the left is not perfect either. Primarily because for its abstractness, which Bobbio himself admits. In addition, in many cases, the conflict between the right and the left is not a defining force in politics at all. But unfortunately, some are trying very hard to bulk together contradictory things. Or simplify complex issues to the extent that those simplifications are becoming unhelpful and even misleading. So how do we fight it? Firstly, recognizing what is happening is not a minor thing. Seeing through the fear-mongering and fact-checking even your own beliefs is necessary. Imagine you've been living under a rock and suddenly have to decide who to vote for in America. You try a simple approach and try a first quiz to determine your best bet. You'd be very surprised by the types of question and division lines they're trying to draw. Like this question. In general, would you say experts who study a subject for many years are better or worse at making policy decisions? Or maybe neither? How answering this question helpful? Is it left or right politicians who are so-called experts and another party is somehow not? Or the heated topic of abortions in the US, where policy choice seems to be all or nothing? It is hardly a left or right question. Rather, looks very much like authoritarian government control or vice versa, liberal, closer to anarchical, do whatever you like approach. And if you were hoping to hear a simple answer on Europe's far-right resurgence, I'm afraid you were hoping to get yourself right into the trap of oversimplification. In some countries, extreme views are fueled by economic stagnation. In others, they are a response to growing safety concerns. Other extreme politicians are simply bribed with Russian money. And in other cases, right neo-Nazi claims are simply a Russian propaganda machine. Like in the case of Ukraine, where the president is Jewish and in the parliament there are 450 deputies, of which only one representative of the Nationalist Party. And for the whole history of its independence, political choices in Ukraine were between pro-Western or pro-Russian politicians. So, right-left scale is completely irrelevant in many cases. And I hope it won't be a surprise to hear that many people often vote not in favor of someone, but against another option. So, if you do not want to be fooled by simplifications and looking for ways to get a sense of different political, social, and economic topics, I believe our channel can be of much help. Please subscribe if you are tired of the newsfeed without a context and opinions without any research or fundamentals. In this video, we mentioned 3 ways of dividing right and left, which can be considered complementary. First, they can be divided based on different attitudes towards changes. The left is in favor of changes, that is, they are progressives, and the right against them, they are conservatives. Secondly, they can be divided according to economic views. The economic left supports state intervention, while the right seeks to reduce it. And the third approach is to divide the right and the left based on different attitudes towards equality. The left considers equality natural and desirable, and the right considers achievement of equality a utopia or do not mind inequality. Oftentimes, at the end of a video on such topic, you are hiddenly or openly being told that, as you see, the right is bad and the left is cool, or vice versa. We will not do this, because we believe that real changes in politics will come when we do not have to accept policies in bulk offer. when we do not have to choose between bad or even worse options, when we are not opting for populist promises of a speedy changes. You can write in the comments below about which ideology or particular country you would like to see a video on, and which views represents you better. It is not important to us whether you're on the right or on the left. We only hope that you are staying away from the extremes. See you soon.